box. It's basically a Pluais, which I will explain, and its relationship with the Coolnacaheragh ambush. I have to give huge credit here to Colm Chambers, a colleague archaeologist, who I suppose discovered this, but there's no real discovering it amongst the people who live there in Coolnacaheragh. And it was the McCarthys who actually pointed it out to Colm. So this is a kind of a quick whirlwind synopsis of what we did. It only took a couple of weeks really and of thinking about this, but it was new to us at the time, being archaeologists. And it's published in the Atlas of the Irish Revolution. So hopefully it kind of underlines what archaeology can add to the historical record, I suppose. So the ambush at Coolnacaheragh is, well, it's one of the most famous ones in the whole of the War of Independence, because it was an undisputed victory from the IRA side. Having said that, there's a lot of variety in the detail of actually what happened on the day. It's sometimes referred to as Poulnabró, which is the next turn to the east, or even sometimes as Coolavochig, which is even further east on the Macroom side. It gets confusing because there was another ambush took place a year earlier at Coolavochig as well, on a single lorry. In the case of Coolnacaheragh, they took up their positions from early February onwards, coming from the north, with I think 3 or 4 different sections meeting at this location. The OC on the day was Sean O'Hagerty, and they were using a lot of local knowledge. There's this map that you can see here is a sketch drawn by Charlie Brown and submitted as his witness statement. And it's remarkably accurate, whether he traced a map or something like that, because the actual road is almost to scale, and he shows the position of various units. The most important thing about the whole ambush really is the position of 2 Lewis gunners. So you had a machine gun at the eastern end and a machine gun sort of central western end. And the command post indicated here with a CP is indicated here at the western end of the ambush. They were waiting for a convoy of British military from Macroom along this road. They had roadblocks in place to make sure that none of the boreens were used to evade the ambush. And the plan was to wait until the trucks moved into position before opening fire with the 2 Lewis guns. Similarly, there was a roadblock at the western end to stop them continuing on to Ballyvorney. Just in terms of the terrain, the high ground in this map is to the north here. Lower ground on the way down to the river. And key to this map for what we're talking about is this little part down here marked OP. That's the observation post. And the wording is Rahuna Hill, 1 mile south. There are several accounts. Brown produced this map in a very detailed account. Micheál O'Sullivan, similarly in his book, and Jamie Moynihan talks about it, Deneen, so on. So there's plenty of different accounts. They differ in detail, but the general ambush is described in much the same way. Where the detail becomes important is exactly why the British auxiliaries, as they moved into the ambush area, slowed down. They also seem to have used 3 or 4 local civilians as a human shield, and they stopped well before they got into the ambush position. There's accusations about an informer being present on the day, located on the 1st Lewis gun at east. But there was also accounts given from those section that the western end, that those who were supposed to give the signal either never got to the observation post or their signal was seen by the advancing convoy. So there's a bit of dispute about why the ambush didn't come off the way they expected it to. How does the Pluais, in this instance, become the observation post? It's located in the townland of Candroma, but the general area here is known as Capanahill, just to confuse matters. And then still further, what's known as Rahuna would be two neighbouring townlands, Rahuna east and west, which lie to the west of Candroma. But they don't often refer to it as Rahuna Hill. It seems to be more often referred to as Rahuna Rocks. And that might be to differentiate it from Rahuna Hill. It's not exactly clear, but what is clear is in accounts like Charlie Brown's, where he indicates the observation post was directly to the south of the ambuscade. So it would seem like the logical place to start. If a signal had been given from high up on Rahuna Hill, which is further west, it would almost certainly have been seen in the early morning light by an advancing convoy. So this photograph here shows what is referred to locally as the Pluais. Its meaning, I suppose, is that it's a natural cave or rock outcrop that is then altered by the addition of walls to form some sort of structure. Inside, it's dark, obviously, and it's L-shaped as it survives today. It's not very big, but it's big enough to shelter from the elements. This is a quick plan sketch that myself and Colm did at the time, and you can see basically the northern facade is dry stone masonry. There's also a low dry stone wall on the west, but mostly it's formed by this rock outcrop. There's about 6 square meters in here. I mean, 2 or 3 people could shelter there, no problem at all. What we do know from local information is that a landless labourer known as Conley Han lived here from the mid-19th century. The story being that he had lost his house and land and his entire family during the famine. So he sheltered here. And as such, the local IRA company knew well of its location and basically utilised it. So if walls could talk, on the rock outcrop sections at the entrance, basically, there's quite a lot of inscribed graffiti. And it's a little bit different to the graffiti from a prison setting or otherwise, where we're basically seeing initials and dates. The 2 dates that we have are both 19th century. And the size and the font kind of style of the initials as they're put in are not dissimilar to 19th century gravestones that we're all familiar with, in that the letters are capitalized and surfed. But interestingly, all of the graffiti that's very visible on that rock face, basically on a vertical rock face, none of these, with the possible exception of RB, but none of these seem to relate to anything involving the War of Independence. They seem to be much earlier. Why I say RB is that they're unusual initials, and there was a Richie Brown in the Coolnacaheragh company, I think it was. But again, it's of the same style and type as the 19th century dates. So for that reason, you wouldn't hang too much on it. As you move into the Pluais structure, which is I forgot to say, roofed by just large slabs of sandstone. Those, just at the entrance of the Pluais today, there are these almost transitional pieces inscribed. So on the left there you have, again, IRA, but you have an awful lot of other incisions, just longer lines. It's just geometric. We couldn't really figure out anything obvious in a lot of these. You can see actually the I as well is much smaller than the R, and the R is quite standard, and the A is huge. It just sort of seems, it's like an idle doodle almost. In a similar location on this first slab, you have what I read as JMC. Again, like I say, the lands here are owned by the McCarthys. So, and the size of the lettering and the style is almost like a mimicking of the 19th century lettering. Again, we couldn't find any obvious J. McCarthy involved in any observational duties. Moving into the Pluais properly, there's a single large slab. And on the underside of this slab, you can clearly see the lettering IRA. Up here at the top left, you can see HL, again with circs, but not deeply incised. The I of IRA is stylized, and it's quite deep, but it's different again to the other inscription of IRA nearer the entrance. It's much deeper and stylized. Similarly, the R is stylized, the A is stylized. At the top right, just here, you can see the outline of an L. Basically, when you digitize over these, you have a very obvious HL and a very obvious LOUT. There is something else at the end of that, but it's clearly spelling out the word for the county, Louth. It's not celebrating that county though. IRA, you can see the R is quite stylized. It may have even started as some other word, because the I and the upright of the R are kind of almost form the number 11. But leaving that aside, it is a stylized IRA. Louth, when you look at it more closely, it's more obvious. Why that becomes important is HL was the adjutant in the Coolnacaheragh company. Humphrey Lynch. There's not that many Humphrey Lynches involved in the War of Independence in Cork. Most often mentioned is Humphrey Murphy or Free Murphy, but Humphrey Lynch is very specific to this area. So there's a good chance, with its positioning alongside IRA, this is who it refers to. Louth seems a small bit more enigmatic at first, but it's Micheál O'Sullivan, who is Ballyvourney, Coolnacaheragh, Pluais kind of territory. In his book, Where Mountainy Men Have Sown, he speaks a lot about a Nick O'Connell. Nick O'Connell, who was just known as Louth, because that's where he hailed from. He was on the run after 1916 and came into the area around 1917, 1918. And he seems to be an older man, but who was central to inspiring a lot of younger volunteers in the area. So suddenly a word that seems completely out of place might be in exactly the right place. So what's in a name? Rahuna here is marked on modern mapping as being this hill. I put a question mark here. Historical interpretation of the ambush have always put the observation post here at Rahuna. up on the hill. There may well have been a sentry post here later on in 1921, but certainly earlier on, it doesn't seem to make sense with where the ambush area is highlighted here in kind of orange. Where the command post is, that's that purple icon. You can see it perfectly from standing at the doorway of the Pluais. And from the Pluais, you can see basically down to the corner of the road down here, where I'm indicating at the very far right of this map on the N22. And that would have been enough. From there, they were using flags by day, flashlights when it was dark, and the flash from low ground at the area of the Pluais would not have been seen by an advancing convoy. It's extremely unlikely anyway. Why Candrama isn't credited, I suppose it's just that a lot of the volunteers who give statements were coming from other areas, and they tend to refer to their high ground as rocks. So Rahuna Rocks seems to be here, 1 mile south. In the same way, Ardeen Rocks is up here. You won't find that on any map either. It's just how they seem to refer to these things. Recording graffiti, just been a bit about it today, and I know Mick mentioned it there. Is it contemporaneous? It's easy to think that in their duty of carrying out observational duties, that while one was resting or staying out of the rain, they were idly scratching at the stone. But it's also very possible that after the truce and so on, after the Civil War, people wanted to come back and commemorate what they had done in some small way, particularly people who went anti-treaty, possibly. But the location of the graffiti on the underside of the roofing slabs of the Pluais, I think, suggests that it's more likely that it's contemporaneous. This is particularly true when you think that Timothy Deneen, who took over signalling, he became officer commanding of signalling, and he says he drew volunteers from several companies in the area. And they were basically 24 hours, 7 days a week, working in shifts of 4 hours, 2 volunteers at a time. And so night and day, this is Cullum. It's a tight squeeze, but you could see if you were taking your break, it might be something that you wanted to do. It's hard to know. But we have to be aware it might be commemorative and several years after the fact. An observation post. The Pluais pre-existed the observation post, of course, but equally it's hidden, it's out of the way. It doesn't occur on any maps. It's not an official dwelling. And possibly the best, or I suppose the indirect evidence that this was the observation post on the day, is that in the reprisals that followed the ambush, the auxiliaries burned the 2 cottages at the site of the ambush. But then they took the long way around to come all the way around to the McCarthy's house, which is 250 yards from this Pluais. And whether informed on or signal seen, it seems to indicate some importance to this area from their point of view. And how long it continued to be used as an observation post, well, we don't know that, obviously. It's, again, if you were to excavate something like this, would you find anything of note or importance that would indicate its use as an observation post? Extremely unlikely, but you might find some material evidence that it was in use at that time. But I think that's safe enough anyway. Other stone-built structures are few and far between. in terms of, dugouts and hideouts. But Jamie Moynihan, in his book, Memoirs of an Old Warrior, which was O'Healy, noted that there was one at Derry Nolan, and he said there was Pluais, which was expanded upon by a mason called Lucy. And it was expanded so that it could accommodate 20 to 25 volunteers as a safe house. This safe house is almost again at the top of the hill. It has views from top of Coombe all the way down to Coolnacaheragh. But it is in an extremely remote area. We did find it, and the masonry that you see here is all that remains. Commercial forestry has been planted, and we could find or feel wall footings by probing to get some sense of the scale of the structure. It did exist. There was a local knowledge that it had existed, and we think this is it. No graffiti that we could find here, but absolutely devastated by forestry. It raises the possibility about reuse of sites. And I know any archaeologist working in upland areas, the sheer number of boolie huts and sheepfolds that you come across, and we seldom consider how they might have been used in more recent times, or we just simply dismiss them as sheepfolds and nothing else. But I think we have to be more cognizant, I suppose, of the reuse of souterrains and caves generally as arms dumps and dugouts, observation posts, and how they might have played into the War of Independence in particular. So in thinking about an archaeology of guerrilla warfare, these sites are extremely vulnerable because they needed to be invisible at the time, either hiding in plain sight as domestic or ancillary buildings, or they were well hidden away. And this is a picture of that hideout. It's referred to by Moynihan. And it's virtually invisible today. Even when you're standing next to it, it's extremely hard to photograph. This is all pre-drone work, really, but they do exist and they can be found. But what's the point of finding them or trying to protect them? And I think the value of them is that therein kind of lies a truth where we can reevaluate the historical record or contested narratives that surround it by being able to put our finger on actual places and actual features that have been long forgotten. Unfortunately, with ambushes, 99% of them took place on roadways that are still used today. And necessary development of them means that some of the smaller features may have been lost. In the case of observation posts and dugouts and hideouts, arms dumps, these things, there's no reason why they should be lost. They also give us that tangible aspect to the history, I suppose. To think about a very small place like a Pluais and experience, day and night, all weathers, you might have had to go out and do your 4-hour shift. And particularly when such ambushes didn't come off, in the case of Coolnacaheragh, that was at least 4 times. So it kind of makes it real, for want of a better word. And finally, I think just to say that the role of archaeology is central in establishing fact. We can have as many contested histories as we like, or narratives, but the fact of I suppose, the nature of the topography and the features that remain, and we can put some of the pieces back together, and suddenly the story makes sense where we might have questioned aspects before. We'll never have all the answers, of course, but I think we can lend ourselves to historians in reinterpreting or in just solidifying the history that we've been given. And I think it's just important to underline here in the centenary celebrations that are ongoing. County Cork, or Cork County Council, sorry, produced this in 2016. And when you see these small little stone structures and how they might have played a part in something that ultimately moved the likes of Birkenhead to declare the failure of our military methods, suddenly this takes on a whole new importance. So finally, I'd just like to thank Cullen Chambers, obviously, for helping with the research, Abarta Heritage and UCD and everyone who put together this conference. And just to say further information on the Coolnacaheragh ambush, there's a very good story maps produced by Cork County Council and Transport